Welcome to Beautiful Thrift Homemaking. I'm Linda. We're reading a vintage cookbook that's also a novel, and it's from 1917. We read the chapters and discuss the recipes. We started in the month of June. We're in October now, finishing up October in the chapter of in chapter 74 and 75. After I read the chapters, we're going to discuss the recipes. Chapter 74, The Dixons Come to Dinner. Charlotte, you must have Bettina tell you how to cook fish this way, said Frank. It's the bechamel sauce on it that you like, I suspect, said Bettina. And it isn't at all hard to make. I serve it with so many things. We like it with carrots. Oh, is it the very same sauce that you serve with carrots? Said Charlotte. I can make it, Frank. I'll have it for dinner one of these days with halibut, just as Bettina has served it tonight. There is only one thing to think about especially in making it, said Bettina. After you have beaten the eggs lightly, add a very little of the hot liquid to it and then pour the mixture into the rest. Then cook it a short time, not long, as a sauce made with eggs sometimes separates. I'll remember, said Charlotte. You do have such good meals, Bettina. How do you manage it? Sometimes I can think of the best things to cook, and other days I don't seem to have a bit of imagination. I plan my meals all out a week and sometimes 2 weeks ahead, said Bettina. It is really quite a complicated process, as I want to have a variety as well as inexpensive things that are on the market. Of course, I may change my plans in many details, but I keep to the general outline. Planning the meals seems simple, but it really requires a lot of thinking sometimes. Excuse me while I bring in the dessert. Bob, will you please help me take the plates? The menu that night consisted of sautéed halibut steak, bechamel sauce, potato cubes, butter sauce, sliced cucumbers and onions with vinegar, rolls of butter, prune whip, whipped cream, and coffee. And in chapter 74 here, we have Bettina's recipes for the bechamel sauce, potato cubes, butter sauce, and prune whip. Now in chapter 75, we read about the wedding invitations. Bob and Bettina had scarcely sat down to dinner one crisp, cold evening when they heard laughing voices at the door. It sounds like Alice, said Bettina. What can she be up to now? And Harry, too. Bob had already thrown open the door, and there, as Bettina had guessed, were Alice and Harry, each carrying a large box. We've come to deliver your invitation to the wedding, said Alice. It may be unconventional, but it's fun. The rest we are going down to mail. That is, if we don't get frightened at the idea and pitch the boxes in the river instead. If that's the way you feel, said Harry firmly, I'll carry your box myself. Please don't, Harry. Just think, I may never have another opportunity of mailing the invitations to my own wedding, so don't deprive me of the privilege. Stay to dinner, won't you? Said Bettina. We had already planned on having Uncle John and Aunt Mary this evening, but they didn't come to town after all. So I am sure we have plenty, even to apple dumplings for dessert. Harry had asked me to take dinner with him downtown, said Alice, by way of celebrating when these invitations were mailed. But perhaps we might stay here instead, since this was the very place in which we first met. Harry, I believe sentiment demands that we accept Bettina's invitation. I must broil another steak, said Bettina, but that will take only a few minutes. I'm so glad you can stay. But we'll have to leave immediately after dinner, said Alice, for these invitations simply must be mailed this evening. That night for dinner, Bettina served beef steak, mashed potatoes, turnips, lettuce, Bettina's Russian salad dressing, apple dumplings, and cream. And in this cookbook chapter, we have the recipe for her turnips, head lettuce, Bettina's Russian dressing, and the apple dumplings. All right, so join me and we will discuss, if you stay along, we'll discuss these chapters and look at the recipes. Thank you. Hi, I'm going to discuss chapters 74 and 75 now, and we'll look at the recipes. So we have two short chapters. The first one, 74, has the recipe for the bechamel sauce and the potato cubes, the butter sauce, and the prune whip. This is not the first time we've had a prune dessert. But before we talk about those recipes, let's see what happened in the storyline. So we have the Dixons coming to dinner. Remember, Mr. and Mrs. Dixon are somewhat older than Bettina and Bob, but Mr. Dixon works with Bob at his office, and so when we first met them, they were referring to them as Mr. and Mrs. Dixon. However, once they got to know each other much more closely, then they started using their first names, which is Charlotte and Frank. So Charlotte and Frank were inspired by Bob and Bettina to find a home because they had been living in a hotel. Yes, they had been living in a hotel. In fact, Charlotte had lived in a hotel her whole life, and so they would eat at the hotel dining room. Charlotte therefore never learned to do any cooking, and so Bettina has inspired her by her hospitality and skill in the kitchen. And Charlotte is learning very many things now about being in the kitchen. So now they're at dinner together at Bob and Bettina's home. And Frank says that he would love for Charlotte to make fish the way Bettina has served it. And it turns out she made sauce, the bechamel sauce for the fish. And Charlotte says she already knows how to make that. So that's great, and she's going to go ahead and make that for Frank sometime soon. The sauce then, I looked that up, and wow, it goes back so far. So I think, 1917, when this book was written, is far back. But the bechamel sauce was made in the 1600s, or, invented in the 1600s by a French chef named Louis de Bechamel. And he was steward to King Louis the 14th. And so he came up with this sauce for the king. And it is nowadays it's considered one of the 5 mother sauces of French cooking. And we know that Charlotte had a whole chapter on the sauces that she makes. And these are pretty much those type sauces. I can't remember what chapter that was in. I should have looked that up for you. Here it is. It was in, if you want to go back to that episode, it was in chapter 20. And she gave us information about a white sauce, a vegetable sauce, a patty sauce, and a croquette sauce, and her method of preparing white sauces. So she has tips on them. And throughout this book, we've come across a lot of recipes that she serves with the sauce, especially just a plain white sauce. She has made that on cauliflower and peas and carrots and so many different vegetables. So that's a pretty common recipe used in this era. So the bechamel sauce, the way that it's made here is 2 tablespoons of butter, 2 tablespoons of flour, 1½ cups of milk, 1/3 a teaspoon salt, 1/8 a teaspoon of paprika, and 1 egg yolk. Now I'm not sure the egg yolk was traditional in this sauce. You do put egg in a hollandaise sauce. So anyway, melt the butter, add the flour, salt, and pepper, mix well, and gradually add the milk. Cook until it thickens, not as thick as white sauce for vegetables. Add the egg yolk, serve immediately. To add the egg yolk to the hot liquid, she has a tip. Beat the egg slightly. Add a small portion of the hot liquid slowly and pour it all into the remainder of the hot liquid. Cook only a short time as the mixture may separate if cooked longer. All right. So then she has the recipe for her potato cubes, which is just boiled potatoes cut into small cubes and with a little salted water. And then on top of that, she makes a butter sauce that she pours over those potatoes. And that consists of 2 tablespoons of butter, 1 tablespoon of chopped parsley, 1 teaspoon of chopped green pepper, and 1/4 teaspoon of paprika. And she mixes that together, heats it, and then adds it to the potatoes, stirring it in. Now, prune whip is a dessert made with 1/3 a pound of prunes, 3 egg whites, 1 tablespoon of lemon juice, and 1/2 cup of sugar. So a very short ingredients list. Pick over and wash the prunes. Then soak for several hours in cold water, enough to cover. Cook slowly until soft, about 15 minutes. Rub through a strainer. Add sugar and lemon juice and cook 5 minutes. The mixture should be the consistency of marmalade. Beat the egg whites stiff. Add the prunes when cold. Pile lightly into a buttered baking dish and bake 20 minutes in a slow oven. Serve with cream. So a slow oven is going to be a lower temperature than the moderate oven, I would assume. The moderate oven was 325 to 350 from what I could tell. So this is cooked at a low temperature. All right, so that's the prune whip. So that's the dessert for the Dixons as they joined Bob and Bettina for dinner that night. And Bettina's also talking to Charlotte about meal planning in this chapter, and that is something to think about. She says she likes to plan her meals for 1 to 2 weeks in advance. She also says that she does take pains to do careful planning, and that it is not an easy thing to do. She likes to have variety, and she likes to watch her expenses to make her meals inexpensive, of course, is her goal. She doesn't always stick faithfully to her meal plan. She does say that she keeps it as a general outline as the week progresses. And she says that, yes, she puts a lot of thought into planning meals. Meal planning is not a practice that I have been using as a homemaker these however many years I've been a homemaker. I think that what I do is I make things up from what I have on hand. So Bettina usually calls that an emergency meal. I think I'm running on, maybe a lot of us are running on at that level because of our fast-paced lifestyle. What do you think of that? I would think that maybe one day when I'm retired, I might start meal planning. It does appeal to me. It's a sort of a beautiful process. You know, I can imagine looking through my recipe collection, finding recipes that I've wanted to try and haven't had time to, incorporating them into meals and so forth. So now chapter 75 was about the wedding invitations that were being delivered. Of course, we have our engaged couple, which is Alice and Harry, and they're walking to the post office with a couple boxes filled with invitations for their wedding. And so it's a fun afternoon for them. As they stop in to Bob and Bettina's, they're going to just hand deliver that couple their wedding invitation. It's going to be a very large wedding because Alice is a society girl and has very many friends. She is marrying Harry, who keeps to himself and is very quiet, and he doesn't really want any of that big fanfare, but he's been roped into it because of his love for Alice. But they decide to stay for dinner because, after all, they met through Bettina and Bob. So they do stay for dinner, and the dinner is the turnips. I don't eat turnips. I'm not opposed to them, but it's not something I was raised with. So she takes 4 turnips and a tablespoon of butter, 1/4 teaspoon of salt, and 1/8 teaspoon of pepper. She washes, pares, and cuts the turnips in small pieces. Cooks until transparent and tender. Drains them, mashes them, then adds the butter, salt, and pepper, mixing thoroughly, and return to the fire to dry out the superfluous water. Serve hot with vinegar. Never cook turnips until brown. Okay. She has some head lettuce, which she removes the outer leaves and the core of the lettuce. Then she cleans it thoroughly. She places it very wet in a towel and wraps it and lays it directly on the ice in her ice box, which is her old-fashioned refrigerator, which the normal refrigerator from 1917 was cooled with block ice. And so she sets it directly on the ice. She allows it to stand for 1 hour before serving to allow the lettuce to get very cold and crisp. And then she serves over the lettuce her Russian dressing. We are going to have another recipe for Russian dressing that's slightly different than this one later on in the book. This one is a 1/2 cup of salad dressing, 2 tablespoons of chili sauce, and 1 tablespoon of chopped green pepper. Mix the ingredients in the order named, shake thoroughly in a glass jar, and serve cold. So I want to comment that now we know one of the reasons she made that chili sauce in a previous chapter. She's using it in her Russian dressing. And I was intrigued by that chili sauce and wanted to try it sometime myself. That was, let's see, page 217. Let me look and see where that was in case you do want to go back to that also. It is in chapter 63. Chapter 63, the chili sauce had ripe tomatoes, green pepper, onions, salt, sugar, ground cinnamon, and vinegar in it. And it was something that she made in a large quantity, 1.5 pints of chili sauce that she made. And so she had definitely 2 tablespoons to spare for her Russian dressing. And then she made apple dumplings again for dessert. I noticed this recipe was not identical to the apple dumplings we had just recently, and I made some and showed them to you. This time she uses water. In the other recipe it was using milk for the liquid, and it's just a little different quantity. This one is for more portions. It includes 4 apples instead of 2 apples, what the other recipe had. All right, well, that's it for these chapters. I would tell you that in chapters 76 and 77, we had the Halloween parties, and the recipes for those was, those evenings, those 2 chapters, was breaded lamb chops, steamed date pudding, lemon sauce to go over the date pudding. And then the next day we had oyster patties, a surprise salad, which was a salad with apple, green pepper, celery, grapes, pineapple, nuts, salad dressing, and diced marshmallows. So that's an interesting one. And then there was a pumpkin pie recipe. She has the recipe for the crust and the filling. She's using canned pumpkin in her pumpkin pie. She's using brown sugar and cinnamon and ginger as her flavorings. And then she has 2 cups of milk and 2 eggs in that. Now she's making something called jumbles, which I will just read to you because I'm not quite sure what they are. So jumbles, 24 jumbles. It's such a fun name, isn't it? 1/2 cup of butter, 1 cup of sugar, 1 egg, 1/2 teaspoon of soda, 1/2 cup sour milk, which would be buttermilk, I think, 1/4 teaspoon of salt, and about 1 cup of flour and grape jelly. Cream the butter, add the sugar, and gradually add the egg. The sugar mixed with the sour milk, the salt, and the flour to make a soft dough, one which will roll easily. Cut into shape with a round cookie cutter. On the centers of 1/2 the pieces, place a spoonful of grape jelly. This was written in an awkward way, so I read the way it said. On the centers of 1/2 the pieces, place a spoonful of grape jelly. Make features on the rest, using a thimble to cut out the eyes. Press the 2 together and bake 12 minutes in a moderate oven. I don't know. It's some sort of, it says it has features and eyes, so it's some sort of a face with grape jelly inside. All right, so next time I meet with you, we're going to start in the month of November with our recipes for Foretaste of Winter, chapter 78. So we'll see you soon.